The National Association of Realtors has just dropped a major update to clarify terms of the settlement. This just happened on May 9th, where in their FAQ documents that they share online, NAR has specified what must be included in the written buyer agreements or the buyer representation agreements. And so that is the topic of today, Gary.
And we're going to dive into that. And welcome to the Chris and Garry Show. My name is Gary Kreth. I am joined by my illustrious business partner in crime, Chris Scott, here at the Paperless Agent. And we talk about all things real estate. By the way, if you like what you're seeing, if you want to see more, make sure that you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And Chris, let's dig in.
All right, let's do it. So, as you know, Gary, National Association of Realtors has been publishing pretty frequent updates to the guidance that they're publishing online for us in real estate, so that we can prepare for the coming terms of the settlement. And just to refresh everybody, the practice changes that we're going to have to adopt, which include things like having a written buyer's agreement before we start showing properties, things like not having any sort of buyer broker compensation listed in the MLS. These changes are going to go into effect on August 17th, I believe it is, right?
17th, correct.
And so as they prepare and as we get closer to that date, they've been sharing these updates, and they just dropped a pretty major one in terms of clarifying what is it that needs to be included in that buyer representation agreement, because we need to know what goes in there before we get one signed, right?
Well, and so, I mean, in all truth, here's what's going to happen. This is going to come from top downs, right? So NAR is going to bring this down. MLSs, the state associations, they're going to bring it down. Your brokerage is likely going to bring it down. So all of this is going to be coming to you in a very clear document. But I think it's also very important that we all are very well aware of what's coming,
Right.
so that we can prepare now for what's coming then.
Well, some of these are potential conversations that we have to have. And I think that's the biggest
Okay.
thing, right? Is that, as we think about the need for having a written buyer agreement signed with our buyer clients before we start touring a home, which is before we start showing them properties, these are really a series of conversations that we have to have with our customer, with our client, so that we can agree and have a signed agreement in place. Without those conversations taking place, your likelihood of getting that signed buyer's representation agreement significantly decreases or declines, right? You can't just
Diminishes.
you,
Yeah,
you can't
for
just
sure.
fire over an agreement without actually explaining or having any conversation and expect that to get signed. So I think what we could do is go through. There are four points that NER has published about what they want to see that will be required in those agreements, and then we can expand on what that means for us. Okay.
Let's do it, Chris. So, what provisions must be included in written buyer agreements?
Yes. So,
Take us through
all
it.
right. The first one is, and I'm just going to read this because I think it's best to read from the source, and then we can go from there. We can talk about it from there. So, the first thing we must include is a specific and conspicuous disclosure of the amount or rate of compensation the participant will receive, or how this amount will be determined, to the extent that the participant will receive compensation from any source. So, in layman's terms, what are they saying, Gary?
What they're saying is you actually have to specify how much I'm going to get paid.
Okay, so can't be open ended. Can't be like maybe this, maybe
Like,
that.
no, is this a surprise? Is this a problem? I don't think this is an issue. It really should not be, because, Chris, I don't know about you, but when I'm paying for services or goods, I want to know, what does it cost,
Right.
right? So I don't want to walk into a grocery store and say, I want this head of lettuce. And they're like, fantastic. That's $825. No, I need it specified. What does this cost? And what do I get from it?
So that seems pretty straightforward. I guess in
It's
the
not a big
past,
deal.
if you don't have a buyer's rep agreement in the first place, which I think there's many people who haven't had buyer representation agreements signed prior to working with a customer. In this case, this is new information for them to have to share with somebody, right? And so I think
But I think it's also it's very important in transparency and disclosure of, hey, what? This is what I'm going to do for you, and this is what you're going to do for me. That's kind of the fair market value of something of what it costs. Okay.
Gotcha. All right, so that's the first thing. Now, here's the second point that NAR has included on what they want to see included in those written buyer agreements, and it's this: the amount of compensation in a manner that is objectively ascertainable and not open ended.
I mean, what the heck does this mean other than just be clear of what you're charging a
Right.
client?
So that means it can be like a flat fee. That means it can be
Could be an hourly
an
rate,
hourly rate,
could be a percentage,
could be a percentage, right?
but it's got to be clear.
But it's so it can't be like can it be a range? Could it be like, oh, between this amount and this amount?
Oh, no,
No.
no open ended.
Gotcha.
It will be very clear.
All right, so that's the second point. Here is the third point: a term that prohibits the participant from receiving compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the agreement with the buyer.
Right. So, I mean, this really just ties into the previous two bullet points, and that is this is what we're going to charge, this is what we're going to earn, and it won't exceed that. Okay, seems fair. And what this also clearly indicates to me is that we're going to have in our buyer rep agreements any indication that we may be paid a bonus from a listing broker or a builder. Which so that's a big question that comes up is, well, what if I'm getting a bonus from a builder?
And that
Well, you're
still
going to
hasn't.
need to disclose it.
It needs to be disclosed, and I don't know how that gets clarified in the buyer's agreement so far. I mean, that might be some further guidance that they'll have to provide for us
Right.
later.
Oh,
I'm going to take a guess here. Is this to say, let's say I'm working, I'm about to work with a buyer. I want to go show them homes, so I'm going to get a buyer's representation agreement signed. Does that mean, let's say I want to charge a percentage? That means what I can't do is say, well, hey, I'm only going to charge you 2%. But then let's say the seller happens to be offering 3% or 4% or 5%. I can't collect more than what I've said I'm going to get from that buyer.
not per this term of agreement. Now, we do not know what amended buyer rep agreements might look like in the future. So, in all contracts, there are amendments, there are changes that both parties have to agree to. Will this be allowed in the future? I don't know, but I would imagine that it would have to be available to renegotiation.
Well, I guess that's no different than, let's say, the appraisal comes back, and then you have to make some amendments to a portion of
Right.
the contract, right?
You're having to renegotiate contracts all the time based on terms, conditions, repairs, appraisal, everything like that. And so this might just become another term of renegotiation.
Which is, I would imagine, and I don't see a problem with it because it's about transparency, right? So as long as it's being transparent, and negotiation on the terms of an updated agreement or an amendment is transparency, right? Everyone's looking at it, signing it, and it is clear then what is exactly taking place. So
You got it.
that leads us to the fourth and final point of clarification of what must be included in those written buyer agreements is a conspicuous statement that broker fees and commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable.
Look, this like totally makes sense. This to me is just a subheader of whatever buyer rep agreement you have. Is like this is it's a disclosure, it's a disclaimer. It's like, look, you are not obligated to anything here. Everything is negotiable.
Right.
Of course, makes total sense.
Well, and I think that goes in line with the not communicating that commissions or fees or any form of compensation is that there's standard rates or normal rates or rates set by some kind of governing thing. Right?
Exactly. There are no normal, there are no standard, there are no rates set by anything, and law does not decree what rates could be. I mean, my goodness, I could charge 0.1%, I could charge 89%. It they're all negotiable. Nobody sets these fees.
Well,
They are not set.
that's going to be based on, right, your offer of what the value that you provide in the marketplace, the marketplace itself and the conditions of that marketplace, and then of course the customer, the client, what they're
Yep.
willing to pay. And so I think that ultimately then the market, in a sense, determines the price within that equation. So, and that just makes it, we're just required then in those buyer's representation agreements and those written buyer agreements just to make a conspicuous statement about those fees not being set by law and are fully
Right.
negotiable.
But I do think all these 4 points, they're very, so there's two things I want to say here. One is it's very important for us as real estate agents and brokers to understand what needs to be going into a buyer representation agreement
Mm-hmm.
in the future. However, I also want to include those forms will likely be promulgated by the state associations or by the state commissions
Mm-hmm.
and then passed down to the broker. And maybe even the broker will have their own attorney rewrite, adjust, whatever,
Right.
their own forms. So these forms, I look at this like as a real estate agent, as a practicing real estate agent, what does this actually mean to me?
Mm.
What it means is I need to know what's coming. I need to know what's changing in the forms. And I need to know where those forms are coming from. And so those things, you're going to be provided those forms by a promulgated source like your broker, like the state association, like the real estate commission, or maybe even NAR. We don't
Right.
know yet.
So the point is,
So
though,
those,
we don't have to worry about updating these agreements. That will be
no,
handled. I think the thing that we need
yep,
to be ready for is what is our process for working with buyers
yes,
in the first place, right?
yep,
What is the process for building trust and communicating expectations and communicating and showing our value, and so that when we get to this part of the conversation, we're able to manage this well and professionally and clearly articulate what's taking place to that customer, so that we can confidently have these agreements signed, have them executed, and start, and so that we can get to work for our customers. It's really just about having that good process and working with a buyer in the first place, right?
it absolutely is. It's all about the process. It's all about building trust. And if you're looking for better ways to build trust with your customers, with your potential buyers and your sellers, make sure you check out the paperlessagent.com. We have a ton of training, online resources, tools, narratives, concepts that you can be using right now. So go check that out. Sign up for one of our webinars and make sure that you like this video and subscribe to this channel, because we're going to be keeping you updated throughout this entire process, and we are going to be updating all of our training to make sure that you are updated as well.
We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks. Take care.